Which teams are the most underrated in each conference? I trust that if you're watching this show in May, you're a diehard college football fan. And so with that, I trust you don't have to wait for Preview Magazine season to have a loose concept of what you think about teams. Therefore, you don't really need to wait to follow right along with me here and have your own opinions on these. The key in determining the most underrated team in a conference, though, and remember this, is not who do I think is going to finish where. That's not the game. The game is know the public perception. So you know what people think about Team X. If you think infinitely higher of Team X, that makes them the most underrated team. I'm going to have some teams here that are already ranked in the top 12 or 13. I'm going to have some that may not finish above 500. I think they're all very underrated. I want to start in the SEC. The Kentucky Wildcats are the most underrated team in the SEC to me this year. It heavily depends on how quarterback shakes out, as will be the case with a lot of these teams. Joey Gatewood, they had some good things to say about him coming out of spring. But I want you to remember, Liam Cohen is the new offensive coordinator here. He comes in from the LA Chargers. Mark Stoops never does this. Mark Stoops felt comfortable enough with where his program is now to hit not a reset button, but kind of hit a fast forward button. Wants to do things different offensively. And the reason I'm talking about quarterback is because a lot of folks around Kentucky think the guy who's ultimately going to start for them, Will Levis, is not on campus yet. He's a transfer from Penn State. So I'll grant you, this is a shot in the dark a little bit. I'm counting on quarterback to work out here. And if it does, I get to blend a lot of things I like in football. Number one, the overall MO of Kentucky. Physical, you can count on them to rough people up when you need them to, but also they don't need to be basketball on grass. They don't need to be Bama circa 2020, LSU circa 2019. But the ability to push the ball vertically down the field a little bit better, that's what they've lacked and really lacked. But I also want to bring in the old schedule dynamic here. I had to give it its own post-it. So it's not just who you play sometimes, especially in the SEC, it's when you play them. They go to South Carolina in week 4. Carolina plays Georgia the week before that. It's a really good time to draw the Gamecocks. They've got Florida in week 5. Florida has got Bama and Tennessee back-to-back right before they play Kentucky. Kentucky plays LSU in week 6. You know who LSU plays the week before? They play the Auburn Tigers the week before, and they got Florida the week after. And Kentucky plays Georgia in week 7. Georgia will be fresh off a trip to the Plains to play Auburn in Jordan-Hare Stadium the week before. And so if the schedule dynamics line up and this offense gels earlier than expected, Kentucky could all of a sudden be a team doing a lot of what you don't think they're supposed to be doing. Kentucky is supposed to settle into their 7-6 mid to low tier bowl for an SEC team, and they're supposed to serve as sort of a bump and set, and the big boys can spike them. Maybe that's the case this year, maybe it's not. I think Kentucky's very underrated. I wanted to go Ole Miss there because you can make an argument that Ole Miss has got the best quarterback in the conference coming into the season. So how are you not underrated if you fit that description? But I went with Kentucky. Scheduling dynamics won out. Let's go to the Big Ten. This one's going to sound weird to you. I'm picking the Wisconsin Badgers as my most underrated team in the Big Ten. And the reason it's weird is because we've got them at 24/7 Sports. Our post-spring top 25, we had Wisconsin at number 16. So how in the world are you going to be underrated if you're at number 16? Well, I'm going to tell you why. I think they're better than the 16th best team in the country. And I looked at some teams we ranked ahead of them. LSU, Cincinnati, Florida, Notre Dame, Oregon, and Texas A&M. I could see Wisconsin being better than every single one of them. Maybe they don't top any of them, but I could see a path that I'm about to lay out where Wisconsin is better than every single one of those teams. Paul Chryst, and you can tell the people around that program, they really believe they have something offensively this year. I think they believe they had it last year, and it got derailed. Last year, they had that Friday night game, I think it was against Illinois, and they had like a perfect first half offensively. People didn't know what to think because you're used to Wisconsin offense being one thing, and then you saw a radically different thing, like the forward pass, a whole lot of it. But then everything got thrown off the rails through no fault of their own. They had some injury at wide receiver. They had a whole lot of COVID stuff. They never really got to play a season. They played, but it wasn't the Wisconsin that they could have been. I think they believe they're going to have some delayed gratification this year, and I tend to agree with that. Wisconsin's got a sneaky underrated wide receiver room. I think they got a sneaky underrated quarterback. A lot of those Badger fans up there, even when Jack Cohn, street name Jack Doan on our show, even when he was on campus, a lot of them whispered to each other. They never said it out loud, but they whispered, Graham Mertz may be better than him. One of these days we're going to see that Graham Mertz kid. Now you get to see him. You actually get to see him play Jack Cohn this year. More on that later. So I am going to take them. And the other thing, schedule dynamic alert here. You know, Wisconsin, they open with Penn State at home. That's a big one right out of the gate. But they also play Notre Dame and Michigan in the first month of the season. So they got Penn State, new offensive coordinator there to open. They've got Notre Dame, new quarterback there. I think that's week 2 or week 3. And then they play Michigan. A whole lot of newness on offense there, too. They're catching a lot of teams that you could argue are in transitional mode offensively, and they're catching them early. And if they think about it, if they come out of that stretch right there, 3-0 or 4-0, which is a distinct possibility, all of a sudden, out of that group, you've also beaten Notre Dame. If they beat Notre Dame in Chicago, then all of a sudden, that's that flag planter. That's not just a conference win. That's a national huge marquee win. I'm going to talk about this game later on over Notre Dame. It's a bona fide playoff contender every single year. And what I'm trying to say to you is that would take Wisconsin from being a nice top 15-ish caliber layup for Ohio State once it's the right time to, that team could actually challenge them. You know, you got Jim Leonard up there still, turned down Green Bay. Everyone's turning down Green Bay these days. Well, he's still the defensive coordinator there. So this is not a team you're just going to throw it up and down the field on. If they can move it up and down the field on you, they become a legitimate contender this year to do a lot more than just make some noise in the Big Ten in their division. In the ACC, total opposite. In the Big Ten, we're going with what was already a top 20 team. In the ACC, I'm going the entire opposite direction. I'm going with a team that has won a combined 6 games in the last 2 years. Most underrated team in the ACC this year, give me the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. I've been waiting on year 3 for 2 years now. Sounds like kind of a weird version of In the Air Tonight by Phil Collins. You give me Georgia Tech as the most underrated team in the ACC this year, though. This could be one of the nastiest schedules easily in this conference. It's one of the nastier schedules in the entire country this year. They play at Clemson. They play North Carolina. They go to Miami. They go to Notre Dame and have Georgia to end the year back to back. So you got Irish and Dogs at the end of the year, back to back. That's the downside. But also, the plus side for me, if I'm looking at them as a candidate for most underrated, is you don't expect a lot from them anyway. You really don't expect a lot from them when you look at the schedule. But I'm looking at them, and they've won 6 games combined the last 2 years. I want 6 wins plus this year. That's what I'm trying to look at. So there are going to be a lot of times they're a dog this year, but it's going to be a lot of 6-point dog, 4-point dog, 9-point dog. In other words, if you get that quantum year 3 leap, which is sort of the sum greater than the individual parts instead of the inverse, which it's like sometimes when you're overturning a culture the first 2 years. If that happens, and part of that click, part of that year 3 click is a year 2 with your quarterback there in Jeff Scott, then all of a sudden you have what it takes to win those games. And so I'm just counting on that. There are a lot of things, there are a lot of elements in place. I need them to click, but there are a lot of elements in place that I like about Georgia Tech this year, enough to where, hey, I'll make them my go-to as not a sleeper, because I don't think they're going to win the conference or anything like that, but I think they're my most underrated team there. Let's go to the Pac-12, all the way out west. Now, this one was hard. I had several teams that I wanted to go with here. I could make a very good argument for Oregon State. I can make a very good argument. I can make a really good one for UCLA. I could make a slam dunk argument for Utah, but I'm not going with any of them. Washington is my most underrated team in the Pac-12 coming into 2021. They have got probably one of the more workable schedules in America. I saw Brad Powers talking about this the other night, and he nailed it. I think I mentioned this once. I'm going to mention it again. Let me tell you about Washington. See, they've got question marks at quarterback, and for that matter, a lot of people out west still don't quite know what to make of Jimmy Lake as a head coach. And I get all that, and I could go along with that. But we're taking a roll of the dice here. So let's just assume that those factors play out. At least we get plus. We don't have to get elite, but at least we get a plus sign in the category of head coach, quarterback. Well, then all of a sudden you look at it and you say, wait a second, is Washington going to be favored in like every game they play? And you say, no, Washington's not going to be favored in every game they play. Well, they don't play USC or Utah from the South. So check mark, check mark. They get Arizona State at home. They get Oregon at home. Who else do they play? They go to Michigan. I mean, that's probably outside of the Oregon game. That's probably their toughest game, and it's an out-of-conference game, and that's week 2. And there are some people out there, now I got some different opinions on this. I'm right at a pick 'em for it. There are some people that think Washington will go into Ann Arbor and be favored. I'll have to see it. I think either way it's going to be very short. The number's going to be very short, under a field goal either way. But I say that to say, all of a sudden, I mean, you look at this, and they got easily one of the most workable schedules in the country. They're not on anyone's national radar. It's Oregon, Southern Cal or bust. There are a lot of people like myself that are in the Utah camp from the Pac-12 South. But be that as it may, I haven't heard anyone in the Washington camp. And Washington's sitting there right now, at least, as my most underrated team out west. And then let's go to the Big 12. I put the Big 12 last because I did not know where to go with this. I know what I think about Oklahoma. I know what I think about Texas. I know what I think about the bigger teams out there. But I didn't know who to go with as most underrated. And so I hit up our buddy Parker over at Stats of War on Twitter, and I said, convince me that TCU is the most underrated team in the Big 12 coming into this year, because he believes that. And so he sold me on TCU today. He said Quentin Johnson could be the breakout wide receiver in the Big 12, and I can go along with that. He also said, I don't think people have the slightest clue how badly, how inept offensive line play was for TCU last year, and it cost them. And trust me, we watched it. If you were on the Ramen Noodle Express with us, we famously watched it implode a couple of times. So yes, he's right about that. But if you get good to above average offensive line play this year, it would be a quantum leap for them in that department. Max Duggan is who you need him to be. He's a good enough quarterback. You got Johnson, so you got a potential game-changing difference maker at wide receiver. And then you look around and you say, well, other than Oklahoma, like, who are the other alphas out here that are just going to run all over them? And the answer is there aren't really any. So I can go along with TCU. Now, there was a trade-off on this. And he said, if I make this argument for you, you got to either do one of two things. You either got to give my website a shout-out, or you got to talk about how handsome I am. I don't think he looks good. I think he's a 6 in Scranton. He'd probably be a 4 in the city. So he's got terrible playoff takes, very sketch playoff takes, decent office takes. But I will tell you, CFB/graphs is a really good website, really good resource. I use it during the season, so I can vouch for it. Not CFB Graphs, because he can't buy the rights to the website. Pathetic. But CFB-Graphs is a really good place to go. So those are some good resources. But to sum that up, SEC, Kentucky, Big Ten, Wisconsin. In the ACC, it's Georgia Tech. Give me Washington in the Pac-12, and give me TCU in the Big 12. And again, told you, a really interactive show tonight. I can be swayed on this because I'm checking the iJosh right now, and it says we are in the middle of May. And so we got some time. I could be talked off Washington. You could easily sell me on a lot of teams out west. You could sell me on Virginia. I gave strong thought to the University of Virginia. Couldn't get a hold of Jamie Oakes today, so he couldn't convince me or sway me on that one. But that's where I stand. Be very interested to hear where you stand.